If you need help, don't go to a random 21-year-old on the internet who's talking about their trauma. Go to Genspect and Geta and, email a parent organization because it's really not fair to dump that. And if you do want to get access to that sweet information, the wisdom, that you might glean from a detransitioner, actually form a real connection with them and take an interest in their life outside of just saying sort of pitying, placating things.
You must be some kind of therapist.
I am some kind of therapist, and I'm about to take you on a journey through the inner wilderness. I've invited brilliant guests from all walks of life to join me as we investigate, illuminate, and inspire transformation in ourselves, intimate relationships, and the social ecosystems we are constellated in. What you are about to hear may surprise you, so hang on to your earbuds for a hefty dose of sanity in a chaotic world. I am Stephanie Wynn, a licensed marriage and family therapist, branching out and building bridges between psychology and everything else under the sun. It's my honor to have you along for the ride. Let's get started. Before we begin today's episode, I have a couple of exciting announcements I don't want you to miss out on. Number one, the film I am proud to be a part of, Affirmation Generation, is now available. This film does an incredible job of exposing the gender crisis, and we want it to reach therapists, doctors, parents, teachers, politicians, and anyone in a position to care. You can stream our early access edition of this film online anytime, as well as watch the trailer, learn more, or donate to the film at affirmationgenerationmovie.com. Number two, I've started a new private online community for listeners of this podcast. You can find it at somekindoftherapist.locals.com. This new offering fulfills several needs. Over the past year, my reach has grown exponentially, and while it delights me to know that my podcast is now in the top 2.5% globally, the matching rise in the amount of emails and DMs I receive has been overwhelming. It's simply too much for one person to handle, and while I care about my listeners, staring at a screen typing words at them for free feeds neither my stomach nor my soul. I had to create some kind of filter to make my engagement feel sustainable and nourishing to me. And fortunately, this is exactly what Locals was designed to do for independent content creators like myself. When you join my Locals community as a supporting member for $8 a month, you get to submit questions that I will answer in members-only Q&A live streams. I'm also considering offering behind-the-scenes early access to new podcasts as they're being recorded. Plus, of course, you get to meet like-minded people who share your interests in an online environment that's free of ads, bullies, and trolls. With Locals, you also get to choose how much you reveal about yourself on your profile, so you can be undercover or out in the open. And you get to select whether your posts in my community are visible to anyone who drops by or only to other committed members. If you'd like to support me at a higher level, you can become a premium member for $24 a month, which allows you to privately message me, and I will prioritize responding to premium members' direct messages. I think this is a great solution that is designed to meet everyone's needs. Although we are just getting started and this community is currently small and new, we've already got some great people on board, including thoughtful therapists, concerned parents, and free-thinking, politically homeless people. Please come along and check out my growing community at somekindoftherapist.locals.com. You can get your first month free with promo code GRANDFATHER. Make the most of your trial membership by asking a question in the latest Q&A thread, and I will provide a live-streamed answer you can join me for or watch later. What have you got to lose? All right, now on to today's episode. Today my guest is Laura Becker. Many of you may know Laura by her what do you call it? Funk God. Is that like your alter ego?
I call it my persona.
By her persona,
Yeah.
Funk God, Laura is an artist, a musician, a writer, and a detransitioned woman who's also featured in our film Affirmation Generation, which has recently come out. You can hear Laura's story and hear from me and other detransitioners and other experts in our film Affirmation Generation, which you can watch at affirmationgenerationmovie.com. So Laura has bravely shared her story with a variety of people and platforms at this point, We won't reinvent the wheel by having her tell her story all over again, although some details might come up. But today, Laura and I are going to explore sort of where she's at in her healing journey and what she's learned along the way in her process of recovering from the trauma of detransition. Laura, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's great to talk to you. Not on Twitter, but actually face to face.
Well, and it feels like we know each other so well because we've been in this film together. We've also corresponded back before I got insanely busy and I was trying this correspondence project with Detransitioners. So we've written each other letters, but it's great to finally talk. I feel like this conversation is overdue. Um, and I want to start off with a recent tweet you posted where you posed the question that someone had asked you: do you want to be known for your trauma or do you want to be known for your art? And you gave this beautiful explanation as to why you actually want to be known for both. And I just saw it, there was so much wisdom and so much self acceptance in that. So let's just start there. Laura, do you want to be known for your trauma or do you want to be known for your art?
Well, I probably won't give as eloquent of a response as I wrote out whenever I wrote that essay, but my answer is still I want to be known for both because they are both parts of my being. The one of my many shticks about funk god is that I'm very intensely funky in good ways and bad ways. Not to be too, dualistic, but there's the good funks and the bad funks and sort of the shadow and the transcendent higher self, and the art, represents that higher self. It represents creating, it represents renewal and inspiration, and the trauma represents destruction and loss and grief, and stuckness. And both of them have always existed in tandem. And so to be known for one and not the other, it's just not the way of the artist, first of all. As an artist, yeah, you're going to talk about your trauma, but also, as a trauma survivor who speaks out about these things, the art is integral to that healing process. And so the process of creation and destruction is intertwined. And I'm happy to be known for both because both of them are forms of transcending. I was thinking earlier today about, the concept of having an identity as a detransitioner and how it can be, perhaps precautions should be taken, when you're identifying too much with something like detransition or being a detransitioner, what that means politically, socially, and mentally. And I was thinking, I definitely have an identity as a detransitioner. But the difference, I think, which is healthy, is that my identity as a detransitioner is in a survivor mentality, not a victim mentality. Although I discuss my trauma, I mean, it's my hobby to discuss my trauma, but I do it in a way of contemplating it and accepting it and practicing transcending it versus identifying with being victimized.
I love that. And it just makes me think of how one of my concerns about the field of psychology and psychotherapy is that when you become overly fixated on trauma or diagnosis, it can become like very inwardly focused and self scrutinizing to the point where there's fear of imperfection. And, almost anybody could qualify for some diagnosis in the DSM. But I feel like we've pathologized the human condition. And I feel like somewhere along the way, we stopped giving room to have personality and to be a person, right? Having a mixture of strengths and weaknesses that come with them. And you can't separate the two. So for me personally, I'm very impulsive, and that is a flaw, but it's also how I get so many things done. And I wouldn't be who I am without that. And I could identify, 10 other character traits like that for myself or for anybody I know where, you it's like you got to take the good with the bad. And And I hear in you this story of self acceptance that, you have these scars, you have literal physical as well as metaphorical emotional scars. And you're not necessarily wearing those scars proudly, but you're not ashamed of them either. You're just letting them be part of who you are. It kind of reminds me of that concept of wabi sabi, like the beauty in the brokenness or the imperfection.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess as an artist, not to be glib about it, but that is sort of the artistic cliche, is finding the beauty within the brokenness. But that all, it could be parodied, but in all earnestness, that is, the function of art, and um of this artist archetype that I sort of identify as. Like, I think, if you can't find beauty, you know, like, the concept of finding beauty within pain, I think is a little bit difficult, when you're in pain. Like, the pain, you're not going to find beauty by looking at the pain, but there is still beauty if you just take your gaze off the pain and focus it on something beautiful. So it's not that the pain necessarily is beautiful, but the fact that their beauty still exists at the same time as pain. Like, an exercise I do sometimes is, like, I carry most of my uh PTSD sort of pain in my heart space. So my heart aches a lot physically. And so when I'm having a lot of heartache, I'll try to focus my attention on other parts of my body that are feeling good, like my hands or feet, like, just feeling nice. I'm just like, both are happening at once. I'm not only this, and I don't overly identify with the pain.
I love that, and that's a brilliant technique. I've taught that in not so many words, right? But this idea that while a part of you is hurting or injured or broken, there are other parts of you that are whole, that your blood and life force is pulsing through, parts that feel okay or that feel good if you tune into it, parts that you can bring your awareness to. And I think that's such a valuable coping tool for pain, especially the types of pain that we can't easily get rid of or overcome, just to kind of let your awareness become diffuse. And it doesn't make the pain go away, but it changes our relationship with that pain. I feel like I've gotten better at accepting limitations the past year because I've been chronically ill for like, to some degree, I've been ill or injured about 90% of the time for the past year. And I feel like I'm starting to handle it a little bit more gracefully, where I work with the energy that I have when it's available to me, and I use it as productively as possible. And then when I feel that pain kicking in or that fatigue, I just sort of soften and relax into it. And I notice that as I have a little bit more grace in my relationship with pain and suffering, it does create some ease. And it allows you to see that there's still something there. It also reminds me of mortality. Um, After certain traumas that I went through a phase that I feel like I'm just now coming out of, really, where anytime I started to care about someone, I would immediately start thinking about their death. Like, I would even dream about them dying. And it was a reflection of the fear of loss, but also the poignance of what it is to really care about someone, to let them into your heart, knowing that death is always with us. And, us young people, I mean, I'm obviously a bit older than you, but, we're relatively young compared to some people. We don't have a lot of people dying all around us all the time, and I think some people don't really start thinking about death until they get a lot older, but I do see a wisdom, and there are certain wisdom traditions that teach this too, in contemplating death and contemplating the finitude. And sometimes it's that the bittersweetness of knowing that everyone and everything you love is temporary and will perish and will change. Sometimes being with that allows you to cherish the beauty that much more.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think we do have a separation, which makes sense. People want to avoid most, like, pain as much as they can. But we do have a cultural separation in the West, um from mortality, from aging, from the elderly. and from those traditional um, wisdoms. Not something I've learned from Jordan Peterson. I've learned many things from him, but definitely understanding the importance of confronting, um, those dragons, and obviously the biggest dragon being death. A friend of mine, I recently got some hate that actually bothered me because I get a lot of hate, and most of it, like, it all triggers me a little bit just because I have that instinctual reaction if I'm getting criticized or shamed. But most of it I just laugh off and I'm just like, who cares? It's just someone who doesn't even know me. But I got some hate recently from someone who sort of knew me in the past, and it was very personal, and it triggered me, and I got a lot of anxiety about just public backlash, or just basically reputational damage or things. And a friend told me, think about this situation and think about how it could lead to death, and go through the logical steps that it would take to get to death, and then step back and examine how far away that would be. And I started going through, like, okay, if this happens, then I won't, be able to have any money, and I'll be homeless, and then I'll get raped, and I, will never be safe, and then I'll die. And it's like this very catastrophizing method of thinking until I got to death. And I'm just like, that's realistically, none of that is going to happen, most likely. And there are so many sort of or should I say, safeguarding measures or protective factors that I have that wouldn't happen, realistically. And that helped me to basically just get rid of that anxiety.
Laura, you often sound like someone who has done a lot of therapy and really made the most of it. I
Well,
want to get
thank
into
you.
your obsession with Jordan Peterson because I think that's fascinating. But you just described sort of an organic decatastrophizing process, and that's a tool that's used in cognitive behavioral therapy to actually think it through. When you're so afraid of something, it's like, okay, let's go ahead, play it out. Okay, so what's the worst that would happen? And what's the worst part about that, and what's the worst part about that, and then what would happen, and then what, and then you get to the point of, yes, realizing that it's unlikely to go there, or that even if it did, you would cope. Um, and I think that's a useful thought experiment because we can spend our lives frozen in fear about possible outcomes, but if you walk yourself through it, it's like, what then? Like, I haven't been through the worst things that anybody on the planet has been through, but I've had my share. And like, one story that I have to tell is that I faced what many therapists would consider one of their worst fears, which is threats to my license. And it's like, so many people spend so much of their life withholding their truth based in fear of ever having to face threats to their license. And it's like, well, okay, I got through it and lived to tell a tale. It wasn't pleasant. It definitely caused some anxiety and stress. And it's part of the reason I've been chronically ill for the past year because I had too many stressors hit my nervous system while I was recovering from COVID, and my nervous system just broke. Like, I literally had a nervous breakdown where my nervous system stopped cooperating with what I needed it to do. So, I mean, but here I am, right? Like you live. And I've often kind of gone through this with people who have suffered immeasurable losses. It's like, there are people who spend their whole lives in fear, and then they go through some horrible loss, and it's like, well, now that's officially the worst thing that you were afraid could ever happen, and it happened. So now what do you have to lose? Like, why would you live another day of your life in fear when the worst thing that could happen to you already happened? Like, these are just
Hmm.
bonus days of your life to do whatever you want with, if you think about it that way.
That is how I started to think about. I mean, there was, a let's say, I was descending into deeper layers of hell over the course of about 13, 14 years. And it just kept getting, I used to joke, like, I keep finding tunnels like under rock bottom. It just kept getting worse and worse. But what I realized is that rock bottom is the moment when you get hit so hard that then you finally wake up. That's what rock bottom. There are many traumatic events that happen, that people would consider very low. I mean, when I hit my rock bottom and then I started to wake up, that wasn't the lowest that I'd ever been. That wasn't the worst that I'd ever been doing, but it was the moment that brought me to the point of no return in terms of me taking accountability for my life and facing the fear. Because I'd already lost so much, and I I was like, okay. I mean, I've had a couple moments like that. I've had about 3 major moments like that actually, but this one was the most severe. I think it was because I'd already started healing and going through my spiritual process, and then it hit me. So when it hit me, I was like, "Okay, I'm ready now to accept all the lessons and now work on it for several years." So facing fear is crucial.
So many directions we could go there. I see a lot of value in hitting bottom as well, and I can relate because I think one of the biggest blessings in my life today came only after hitting bottom and really feeling my pain deeply and in a very raw and honest way. It was only after kind of letting that pain cut me to a certain depth that I was able to kind of open to the universe in a way that made room for the light to come in. But let's talk about your obsession with Jordan Peterson. You talk about you talk about many kind of Jordan Peterson like themes, but in your own like 26-year-old funk god artist way. When you talk about hell, for instance, and I'm a believer that hell is a state of mind, and that heaven and hell exist here on earth. That if you get into the spiritual, earth is a mixed realm. You have angels and devils here playing it out within each of us. And I think that's part of why Jordan Peterson, one of many ways in which he resonates with so many people, is that he speaks to those aspects of the spiritual experience in a very grounded way and without always relying on religious language to do so. So, hell is just one sort of touch point that, something I hear Jordan Peterson talk about that you just talked about. But maybe we can kind of bring it back to the beginning, because and for those who aren't familiar with Laura, I know at this point we have a lot of community in common, and like Abel DMs me about how he's like Abel and Casey are both like Laura's getting me into making AI JP art. I mean, there's a whole community of people who know what you're up to. But for those who aren't
Yes.
familiar, um, you are you are definitely in Jordan Peterson's topmost fan club, obsessed to the point where some of us have tried to intervene, like when you make creepy art.
Yes.
So, but I'm glad we can joke about it. And by the way, thank you for
Mhm.
introducing me to the music of Akira the Dawn, which all unfolded over Twitter. But like, how did you get into Jordan Peterson? Do you remember what it was like discovering Jordan Peterson, and what was your journey like?
Yeah.
Did you initially, I can imagine like being young and in the culture that you're in the past, like, did you initially feel a lot of resistance to Jordan Peterson, or did he immediately appeal to you?
I mean, I started getting into Jordan Peterson like directly after the rock bottom. And so at that point, I was just so dazed and confused that I was like, I need to go back to basics. And Jordan's whole message, or his like most cliche common message that circulates, is just the idea of cleaning your room, you know, going to the way he described it, like people make fun of that, but the way he actually describes it in dense detail of how you can change your perspective to try to sort out chaos, try to order chaos just at the slightest level of the smallest level of chaos that you possibly can. Order that and then move on incrementally until you have ordered more chaos. That was a breakthrough to me. It sounds simple, but just his overly complicated way of describing it, like that helped my brain because I have a very complicated, I think a lot divergently, just like he does. And so the concept of order and chaos became really my obsession. That became sort of my philosophy because that's really what it's about. If you're dazed and confused and completely overwhelmed, your nervous system is overwhelmed, and you have a lot of stuckness and depression and hopelessness, then ordering chaos is going to make the most sense. It isn't just, that's a neutral concept. it isn't, because you can order chaos in a way that's beneficial to you or not beneficial to you, and chaos is a neutral thing, and so is order. But if you can start to have a better relationship to balance out order and chaos, sort of in a Taoist sort of way, um, that I became obsessed with that, and immediately I latched onto that. I did not have any issue with Jordan Peterson. And early on, a couple of my friends were like, "He's evil." I was like, "No, he's not. He's just talking common sense." And my therapist happened to like him too, and like every cool person I knew was into him. So I'm just like, okay. And so yeah, right away it was very impactful and powerful to me, and his concept of ordering chaos and setting incremental goals. Again, it sounds so simple, but when you listen to hours and hours of him talk about, history and archetypal concepts and biblical concepts, and blowing it up to this universal existential level and then breaking it back down into these finite manageable pieces, that is what I really needed. Just that, going all the way around, and then coming back and saying, okay, I need to take some responsibility. I can achieve certain things, and I'm going to make goals. And I started making goals lists every month. And then I started making them every week. And then I started making them every day. And now, I've been doing this for about 2 years now. And I rely on those goals lists because I noticed that every single thing that I put down on that goals list, I ended up doing. And I just started doing something that's been on that goals list for 2 years, which is making psychedelic pour paintings. It's like, I know if I put it on the list, that I'm going to be bored one day and be like, oh, yeah, I need to do that, or I should do that. Just keep referring back to your goals and intentions, and you'll eventually achieve all of them. So that's how it began.
If you were to come to me as a client and tell me you were feeling grumpy, irritable, lethargic, stressed out, or unfocused, I'd want to do a thorough assessment of your lifestyle. And one of the first elements we'd look at is the quality and quantity of your sleep. You need at least a good 7 hours of refreshing sleep every night in order to be your best self. There are many things that can get in the way of that: a demanding job, a new baby, or just plain bad habits, for example. But if you're having difficulty falling or staying asleep for the simple reason that you're too hot, you're too cold, or you and your partner don't agree on the temperature, look no further. I have just the thing for you. And since this is not therapy but a podcast, I can actually sell you stuff. So I'm going to genuinely recommend that you check out the Pod Pro cover by 8 Sleep. It's the most advanced solution on the market for thermoregulation. The cover can adjust the temperature on each side of the bed individually for you and your partner based on your sleep stages, biometrics, and bedroom temperature, reacting intelligently to create the optimal sleeping environment. Personally, I have mine set to run on autopilot so that my bed is warm when I get in, cool in the middle of the night, and warm again when it's time to wake up. I sleep very soundly this way. Improving your sleep is one of the best investments you can possibly make in your overall well-being, the quality of your work, and the lives of the people you touch. So go to 8sleep.com to check out the pod and use the code SOMETHERAPIST at checkout for up to $200 off your purchase. Even if they're already running another sale, this code will get you an additional $50 off. And to my listeners around the world, 8Sleep currently ships not only within the USA, but also to Canada, the United Kingdom, select countries in the European Union, and Australia. All right, now back to the show. Wow, what a beautiful telling of the story that you were at rock bottom, and that's when you discovered. It's like I'm picturing Jordan Peterson as like passing a rope down a well. It's like the help is there, right? And
Yeah,
and
I should make some art of that.
I honestly think that the people who hate Jordan Peterson are exactly the ones who need his medicine the most. Like, they're the ones who need to
Hmm.
clean up their rooms, and it's like there's this resistance to the medicine because there's this poison in them that they've been absorbing from their environment or their conditioning or their trauma or what have you, and they can't see clearly. And I think, yeah, it's a huge test of a person's character, their ability to resonate with wisdom, their ability to think for themselves, to see how they think about Jordan Peterson. Um, And so you described being at this rock bottom and then seeing that this help was being offered and that there was something you could do. And it started with ordering your immediate environment, cleaning your room physically, but also metaphorically, taking control of what you could take control of. And I think that's really the essence of recovery from hitting bottom. And that's how people make it out of some really dark places. And you just described it so beautifully. I've worked in therapy for years sometimes with people who it's like they're hovering a few inches above rock bottom. Like they're so afraid to hit bottom, but they're staying in a really low place. And there's this resistance to grief and sorrow, a resistance to pain, but they're already in so much pain. And it would only turn up the pain dial just one more notch for them to really feel it and let themselves encounter the futility and the sorrow and the grief of what is not working or what has been lost or what the truth of the matter is, right? And it's like if you can just allow yourself to touch the bottom of that well and get some momentum, get some movement, you can start to move from that stuck place hovering for years just above the bottom of the well, and you can hit bottom and you can start to bounce, you can start to work with what you have. And it starts with, what can I control in this moment? Is there one thing I can make more orderly or more beautiful? I mean, put more casually, it's kind of, you could chalk it up as like a fake it till you make it thing. But really, it's I think the blessing of the fact that our thoughts, feelings, and actions are separate and they can be differentiated. And we spend a lot of time in suffering when we operate from the belief that how we feel must govern how we act. And it's like the moment you realize that those two don't have to be attached to each other, that you can feel like absolute hell but you can do something constructive anyway. It's like when you get that, well, then you've discovered a power you didn't know you had before. You're no longer stuck with how your pain and suffering and trauma would compel you to act. It doesn't mean you have total self control, but you work your way up one bit at a time. It starts with cleaning your room, or it starts with regulating your sleeping or your eating or exercising, or just taking care of what you can take care of. And it's just so beautiful how you described it, Laura, that you started with that, and you started making monthly goals, then weekly and daily, and now you have an Etsy shop. Oh, I should have worn my shirt. I have a shirt from you.
Yes.
um and I'll make sure that we have that in the show notes, the information about your Etsy shop and where people can find you. You've really accomplished a lot that way. You say it's been going on about 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, and it's been excruciatingly painful. I mean, because I've been in therapy weekly, or even bi-weekly, and processing, my entire life pretty much. And a lot of specific PTSD causing events, and then the complex PTSD of, childhood developmental things and existential things. So it's been excruciatingly painful these past 2 years. I mean, I've cried pretty much every single day, if not multiple times a day, and I still cry every single day, and it's very painful. But and yet this has been the most productive 2 years of my life, and I've accomplished more, and I feel better about myself and more confident, and I have more connections, and I just feel more competent. So I've released a lot of shame despite the pain. So they aren't mutually exclusive.
I want to talk to you a little bit about being, so-called detransitioner or ex-trans. I mean, obviously there's debate over what terms people use. I think detransitioner is kind of the consensus of what most people use because it's easy to follow. You also talked about being in the survivor mentality, so we could talk about being a survivor of malpractice. So in our film, Affirmation Generation, Lisa Marchiano talks about the Jungian concept of the shadow, that the shadow is any part of ourself that we don't really want to know about, and how she's thought about how detransitioners are like holding the shadow for society. I'm curious, as someone who's been through that. How did how did seeing that section of the film resonate with you?
I completely agreed with her because detransitioners are like the dirty laundry. I mean, and it makes sense because if you track the history of, and I know you know it, but if you track the history of the trans movement and how that came about, how the T was added to the LGB and all of that, the people who were identifying as trans were already the dirty laundry of society. They were homosexuals. Maybe some perversions. There was trauma victims or survivors. Now we're seeing the most vulnerable in our society still transitioning, and so it makes sense that the detransitioners would be that dirty laundry even more so because they're still the same vulnerable populations of homosexuals, trauma survivors, neurodivergences, and the young, but they also have the added stigma of being the dirty laundry that many people who identify as trans don't want to accept within themselves, and the supporters of, as I say, the well-intentioned liberals don't want to view, and maybe some, more conservative leaning people as well. Because again, it's still that dirty laundry in their eyes. For the left, they see detransitioners as the dirty laundry of their own unexamined, sort of shallow understandings of the human condition or development or spirituality or things that relate to medical interventions for mental health issues. And for the more conservative side, they view detransitioners as the dirty laundry of the gays and the trannies and just that sort of thing, the more traditionally seen dirty laundry. I like to say that the when I get insults from left leaning people, it's always like, you're a bigot, kill yourself, you're slaughtering trans people, you mind your own business. And then from the right, it's more like, serves you right, you're going to hell and you need to accept Jesus, and you will never, that's your own problem, like live with it, snowflake. Like just both sides dirty laundry or shadow, unexamined, maybe self, shame comes out direct towards someone in a vulnerable position like a detransitioner.
There's a lot of projection in that. And it's like, yeah, you really get the worst of both worlds. I mean, from the left, here are people who think of themselves as being so compassionate and non-judgmental and understanding and embracing victims and embracing minorities, and yet it's like, I wonder if part of the resistance that's keeping this locked in place is that the resistance to look at how they themselves are treating you, right? And so they just keep doubling down and doubling down on finding ways to dehumanize you. Um, what do you think about how people are currently talking to, with, and about detransitioners? Because I will say it's been a learning curve for me these past few years since I started learning about detransitioners and talking to detransitioners. And I think, like, in general, most people in our society like aren't really all that great at being with pain and inconvenience and like things that you can't explain away. And I see myself as a bit exceptional in that regard, partly by my nature, but also by years and years of being a therapist. Like it's my job to sit with people in pain, so I've gotten good at it. Um, and I can't, it's harder for me to kind of put myself in the mentality of someone who is in the habit of avoiding sitting with pain, because that's like one thing that is not an option for me. And my heart just compels me to do it because of my own suffering and what I needed when I was in pain. So um it seems to me like detransitioners, like you described, the kind of the worst that you get from the left and the right. But then from people who care, is there like a rushing to fix it? Is there putting you on a pedestal? Is there treating you like a victim that needs to be coddled? Like, do we know how to talk to each other as human beings, but also like, do we as a society know how to talk to the people among us, and I want us to emphasize among us, who have been through this unique form of trauma. Because I'm thinking ahead to, my prediction is that by 2026, detransition will be a household name. Everyone's going to know that people who've been through what you've been through exist and are part of our society. And right now, I just feel like we're not very good at talking about it or talking to people who have had these experiences. So, what have been your experiences from people who maybe like aren't on those extremes of the left and right, who maybe mean well but miss the mark? And then also, is there a way for us to talk about this that doesn't replicate the excesses of the left, which focus on like being overly sensitive and putting trigger warnings around everything and treating people like they're a special class of victims? Like, can we not replicate that while also learning to be sensitive in ways that maybe we've missed?
Yeah, I mean, we know that people are going to project whatever, they have going on in their life onto whatever situation that they're perceiving, that they're going to perceive it through their own lens that's biased. Um, so, you get there's sort of the common groups of people that a detransitioner would interact with. There's the parents. That's a huge group of people. Parents, desperate parents that are in a lot of distress, reaching out to trauma survivors. If we just take the term detransition out of it, let's just use language that other people are familiar with and to understand this is a trauma survivor. This is a young, most of the time, younger trauma survivor. And there's, you know, middle aged adults reaching out. And I mean this in a neutral way. I'm judging, but there's middle aged adults, parents desperately crying and reaching out and asking for very high levels of support and advice from these young trauma survivors, including myself. And of course, I happen to be very into psychology and therapy and the healing world and different things. And I like to talk. So I've been happy to talk to people. I've done consultations at times, paid consultations that I stopped doing because it was just, I felt out of my comfort zone with that, as you could imagine. Um, but those types of people, they don't have the emotional they don't have access to a more sophisticated emotional intelligence because of their high levels of distress when they reach out to someone who really has very little advice to give. I think everyone is processing their own stuff and they can help the public or help themselves mainly through writing essays and things like that. Like, I think if people really want advice, look at the content that these people are making. And if someone isn't making content, don't reach out to them because they're not um, in a place to be public. And if you do reach out to someone who's written an essay, try to keep it on that topic because, you know, um, there is advice to be had. Like I've developed positive relationships with parents and friendships, and there's a mutual giving of advice. It's not that detransitioners are complete, like, we don't want to lean towards the left, the overly coddling idea that you can't ever, infringe on them in any way and or talk to them about things or that they don't have advice. But I think, like, for example, I was just doing a space on Twitter with a couple of my friends, including Chloe Cole, and we were just hanging out, and the space was I named the space Friday night funky people's hangout, Friday night boogaloo, or some, like, kind of jokey thing, just a casual hangout. And we were just talking about, Jordan Peterson, like different things that we talk about as people. And then some random mom came in and just completely derailed the conversation. Just came in, basically just said, she started crying, it was very, like, to me it wasn't even awkward because I just experienced it so much, but I could tell it was awkward for, it's not socially appropriate to do that, to go and just say, "Oh, hey, I just saw you in this space that had nothing to do with gender whatsoever, and just because you're Chloe Cole, a detransitioner, I'm going to completely hijack this space and start crying about my daughter and basically begging for advice and saying, like, the universe showed me you in this space to give me advice. I mean, it's like, obviously I had empathy for this person. I mean, they're in a lot of pain to be saying that, but it's not socially appropriate. It's not having proper boundaries, not respecting other people. It's not respecting detransitioners' boundaries, and there's really no advice that can be given. That's the thing. Like, parents are reaching out for advice because they just want to cling on to anything. And I think they could do with some distress tolerance, because you're reaching out and you're basically asking, I've done consultations with parents and they basically ask me, how do I save her? What help? This is the question I always get. What would have made you not be trans? What could your parents have said? And I'm just like, listen, it's extremely complicated. I have trauma from my parents, from abuse, from my family. So it's complicated. And, you know, and they ask these questions that I can tell they just haven't been able to find, coping strategies to deal with the uncertainty. And I don't think it's fair to place that upon a young trauma survivor, especially, um, the really young ones and the ones who aren't speaking publicly. I mean, there's a difference between maybe directly writing something very coherent and directed at an audience of parents or giving advice directly as a detransitioner, and writing a personal, sort of reflection post, and look and just self-processing that way, and maybe it's public, you know. So I think I have a lot of thoughts on this. Like, I don't think it's socially appropriate to do, to to I don't to expect someone to perform emotional labor for you as a stranger who has no clinical training and who has, just a lot of trauma experience, and they're young and they don't really know. Um Someone like me, I have studied a lot of these things on my own because I'm interested in them, and that makes me seem, you know, intelligent, and that people, not to say that I'm not intelligent or that I don't know what I'm talking about, but at the same time, you know, um we need to come back to basic sort of common sense. Like, you're like a 55-year-old parent asking a 22-year-old for parenting advice. And this is what comes back to, like, the sacred caste idea, or the specialness that's around gender or trans or detrans. There's nothing special about a trans person or a detrans person. These are all just human condition issues, and the detransition stuff is not special. The detransitioner is not going to be some kind of oracle to you. And I'm sounding really negative right now. I really have complete empathy for people. I respond to emails and different things all the time, but it is, if I'm being honest, like, it is, it's a little hysterical. It's a little histrionic. And you know, we need to, this is what I would always tell parents. I would say, you know, read something about development, read something about child psychology, read something about evolutionary psychology. Because what we're seeing today is that one moment of contemporary culture manifesting in a specific way due to medical and social, um, causations. Just look, decades into the past. There's been plenty of material written about similar things, and we don't need to get so caught up in this, the pseudo, spirituality and religiosity of gender.
As a therapist, I've gotten an up close and personal view at what people tend to struggle with day in and day out. Turns out, it's almost universal that we know we should be taking better care of ourselves in terms of the basic building blocks of well being, like diet and exercise. But as valuable as it is for our mental and physical health to change our lifestyle habits, it's also much easier said than done. People often set goals that are too lofty, only to feel even worse about themselves when their aspirations inevitably fail. That's why I recommend starting with positive changes that are as simple as possible. Enter my new favorite beverage line. Organifi makes it so easy to improve your nutrition and start feeling better right now with refreshing plant-based blends of superfoods and adaptogens that you can just mix with water. My personal favorite is their green juice. It contains moringa, ashwagandha, chlorella, spirulina, wheatgrass, beets, turmeric, mint, lemon, and coconut water. 100% organic with no added sugar, and it tastes great. My family loves Organifi Gold, which promotes relaxation and restful sleep, served mixed with warm almond milk before bed. Organifi also makes several other powerful blends, all organic and loaded with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytonutrients, anti-inflammatory herbs, and adaptogens. For less than $3 and 3 grams of sugar per serving, you can start giving your cells the support they need to manage stress and feel good. Check out their product line at Organifi.com. That's spelled ORGANIFI.com. And use promo code SOMETHERAPIST to get 20% off your entire order. Your whole body will thank you. Yeah, wow, these dynamics that you describe are there's so many layers to them. Like, a couple of words that are coming to mind are parentification and martyr. So, when I think of a detransitioner, there's many different childhood histories that could be going on there, but among those options, definitely some people were let down by their parents. Some people were neglected or harmed by their parents. I would argue everyone who's been through the trauma of medically transing your body only to discover you can't change sex and that doesn't make you feel better. Everyone who's been through that trauma, especially those at a young age, have been let down by authority figures. And when you're young, parents and authority figures tend to be seen as a cohesive unit. So, doctors and therapists, and maybe any teachers or other adult figures in the lives of these young people who participated in moving them in that direction, all kind of lumped in together with parents as authority figures that let them down, that misled them, betrayed them, hurt them. So you already have this experience in some way, shape, or form as a detransition. Obviously, individual experiences vary. And you haven't been properly looked out for by the adults you want to be able to trust and look up to for guidance. And then once you've gone through this additional trauma, then you have all these people who are also older than you, who are, in some respects, authority figures, who are also parents, turning to you saying, "We need your help. We need your advice." It's like a double whammy.
Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic, because I mean, I do think there's a positive aspect to the parents. I mean, because it really is a it's a protector against vulnerability to be of service to other people, to be able to help people. And it's been a very healing to me to be able to feel valued by other people asking me for advice. Getting a lot of just really, really lovely, genuine comments from total strangers, emails, and most of the emails and messages I've received aren't just like a frantic, I demand you help me with this situation, or someone just trauma dumping on you. I mean, there's definitely a lot of that, but most of it is just very kind messages. And then people sort of adding in, like, my own child is going through this, and I just wish there was something I could do. Um, and I have been able to create a positive self image by by seeing myself through the lens that some of these parents see me. Like, I have a mom friend who, actually I started consulting with her, and we actually became genuine friends. A mutually beneficial, real friendship and relationship, not just trauma dumping and giving advice, or, in a shallow way. Um, and she told me, like, you don't see yourself the way that all of us parents see you. We see you as so resilient and strong and a sense of hope, and you got out of this and you were smart and all this. You just don't see yourself that way. And so having genuine relationships and interactions from those types of figures, not even the fact that they're older, but from anybody, is extremely powerful, but especially because they are older, because of my personal relationships to my family. I have a lot of mama bears and some papa bears and, aunts and uncle figures and all these older people who just kept telling me, like, you're going to be fine. Like, you're way ahead of me. This is a comment I get a lot that I appreciate. They're just like, I didn't have the shit that you figured out until like 5 years ago. Or like, I'm in my 60s and I'm just now figuring out what you already know and talk about in detail. Like, I get a lot of reassurance that I am actually a lot more healthy and competent than I feel because of my shame. And so I don't want to color these parental interactions as all negative. They're very positive in many ways. Um, but I've also been able to spin it that way, and other people might not be at a place where they can receive or give that sort of intimacy, or communicate these sorts of things. And that's what I see happening with some of the younger detransitioners.
Well, I really appreciate what a nuanced and robust view you just gave of, to put it bluntly, like the do's and don'ts of the relationship potential between detransitioners and parents. And this is something that I don't really hear people talking about a lot. Like, I talk to a lot of parents and I talk to a lot of detransitioners, and I witness parents talking and I witness detransitioners talking, and I witness these dynamics between parents and detransitioners. But it's like, let's step back for a second and talk about the relationships between ROGD parents and detransitioners. And you gave such a beautiful description of sort of what that looks like at its least healthy, which, the parentification, the martyr dynamics, the emotional labor of and bearing all your trauma for what, right? But then you also showed the bright side of what these relationships can become when there's, it sounds like, mutuality, reciprocity, respect, sensitivity to where you're coming from. It sounds like what goes well for you in the relationships that can sustain you is that even though these parents might be just as desperately worried about their kids as some of the other parents you hear from, there's also some containment of that and like healthy boundaries where they recognize that you're a separate person who has your own stuff to deal with, and they're able to navigate or negotiate that relationship with you in a way that's mutually beneficial. Because it sounds like, as someone with your own family issues, whatever those family issues might be, there is something that you stand to gain out of someone else's parents being like quasi parental figures for you. I've learned a lot through trial and error these past few years as I've been working with and reaching out to detransitioners. And I remember one of the many things I've gotten flack for was something I posted on Twitter uh, suggesting that detransitioners and parents can have positive relationships, because the reaction was like, "Oh, you don't know how many of us hate our parents and want nothing to do with it." And it's like, but I think you just gave such a beautiful view. So, and let's just go into that a little bit further, because I think our audience is hungry for this. What could better relationships between these two sort of populations that are both in different ways affected by this issue, the detrans population and the RGD parent population, what could better relationships look like? And how would you suggest that people approach one another? And like, what tips would you give for helping those relationships go more like the sort of the second set of relationships you described rather than the first?
I mean, I definitely think maintaining boundaries for yourself, knowing, your own, being, aware enough of your own sort of triggers and communications and attachment, related things. I mean, just in any aspect of life, that's my advice, to know, to be aware of that. But when you're interacting with potentially triggering. I mean, anyone is potentially triggering, but especially around issues that are traumatic for both parties. I think being aware of your own, communications and needs in a any sort of interaction. Do you want someone who's just going to dump a bunch of, a long email to you, a stranger dumping a long email to you and just expecting you to answer it? Like, I've gotten emails. I've learned over time how to have boundaries. One of the boundaries I placed was expecting payment for my time, because I would talk to these people and give them like hours of my time. And it was actually my mom friend who suggested that. She has very looked out for my interest. And then one time I got a very long email, and I typed out my response. And of course, I'm going to type out a thorough, detailed response because I want to give this person the best information possible. And I do have a lot of information. Um, but I noted I took like an hour. It took an hour to write that. And I was just like, that I can't. And so at the end of it, I said, if you want to talk more, we can have a paid consultation. And he didn't respond after that. And that kind of felt rude to me. He didn't really say thank you, or he just, a desperate person came in, dumped a bunch of their trauma looking for a quick fix. Someone gave them a treasure trove of information, not to be like too grandiose about it, but a lot of information and time. And then they got whatever, or maybe they didn't get what they wanted out of it, some kind of magical solution. And they just ignored that person. And I don't know what they did after that. So not to focus on the negative, but to get into what can be done is to approach the person more on a level of mutual interest, not just to say like, the interactions I've had that are most positive, versus being very deep or more a little more shallow online, it all of them, what they have in common is that there's mutual interest and actual compatibilities and shared values and interests outside of just, we both have these gender things going on in our life. Me with my detransition, you with your kid. We've bonded over art and humor and music, and they actually take an interest in my life apart from me being a detransitioner. They value my art, they value my thoughts, they support me and encourage me on my vulnerable posts. And then that makes me feel like it's safe to allow them to open up to me and to hold space for them, because I know they can hold space for me. And it's you know just the same things you would apply to any relationship. um but just having grace around that and bonding over other things besides the detransition, because unless you're specifically offering some type of service where you're basically like, ask me, you can message me if you need any advice, you know it's hard. I think it's can possibly be unhealthy, because as a detransitioner, to keep getting those messages, because if you do have attachment issues, if you do feel insecure and suddenly you're getting a ton of attention, but and people are, sort of putting you on a pedestal, and it's very, very confusing to the ego. And I've joked a lot about this, and been very open about it this whole time of being public. I'm just like, wow, my own thoughts are like, no one gives a fuck about me. Meanwhile, that very, like, within an hour of having that like breakdown or whatever, personally, I'm getting messages that are like, you you will save a generation of children, and like all these. I'm just like, that's a polarity, like, and I appreciate all those messages, and they really have. I've absorbed them into my self concept to have a more healthy self esteem. But at the same time, it's like, it's a extreme duality. Now luckily I'm very into dualities and like noticing them and being like, wow, that's the duality. But I think for people who haven't been able to develop their ego or really dissolve it in sort of more of a spiritual way, or sort of understand more long-term implications of or be able to see long term to the future and have more of a being able to zoom out versus being so self-focused. I think to get receive those sorts of messages like Chloe Cole, people just talk about her all the time. Like they don't care whatsoever what they're saying about her. And I'm becoming friends with Chloe and we're gonna hang out in LA and um she is young. She is, very smart, very brave, but she is inexperienced. And, it's just a lot. And it's kind of like being a child star. Like everyone is projecting all of their garbage onto you. Um, and so I do, it's, if you need help, don't go to a random 21-year-old on the internet who's talking about their trauma. Go to Genspect and Geta and email a parent organization because it's really not fair to dump that. And if you do want to get access to that sweet information, that the wisdom that the wisdom, that you might glean from a detransitioner, um, you know, actually form a real connection with them and take an interest in their life outside of just saying sort of pitying, placating things. And I know that's a fine line. I mean, that's a whole other discussion, like the way people give their, remorse or sympathies to detransitioners. I mean, sometimes they're helpful. Like if they're more encouraging, I think they can be helpful. Like the messages that resonate with me are when people say, like, you've been through so much and yet I can still see that you have such a light and you have such amazing art and just hang in there and stuff like that versus the messages that are like, wow, you should sue your doctors and get if I were you, I would sue and I can't believe that happened. This world is a disgusting place and like just you can tell it's more focused on their own internal feelings about it than it really is about them trying to really comfort you.
I hope you've been enjoying this episode of You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist podcast. If you like what you're hearing, now's a great time to like, subscribe, follow, rate, review, or share. You can also support the podcast by visiting sometherapist.com/shop, where you will find goods and services I have personally curated to support your well-being and enrich your life. We're just building the shop, so check back periodically and feel free to suggest recommendations. All right, now back to the show. Yeah. Wow, so much important information there. I mean, for one, it's like if you're going to approach a detransitioner who you don't have a relationship with, first think about, do you want a friendship or do you want a professional relationship? Are you looking for something one-sided? Are you looking for them to help you? Or are you offering a friendship? And when you come offering friendship, I mean, rarely do we approach each other saying, "I would like to offer you a friendship." That's like not how we build it, but there's an art to it, right? And it starts with small gestures of give and take and reciprocity and testing the waters and offering little bits of yourself and building from there, right? And if that's not something that you're offering or have the capacity to engage in, or that's not something that they want with you because they're free not to want to be your friend, um, then consider that that would make the relationship, a one sided professional relationship and consider offering compensation for your time. Now, you brought up some important points about consultations. You said that you have done paid consultations. You've also pulled back from that because you felt in over your head or the way that they were affecting you wasn't good for you. And this reminds me, I actually just had a conversation very recently with a detransitioned friend about this. She was asking me about consulting, and I was like, yeah, you just put a button on your website that's like if someone wants your opinion, they can pay you money for it, and maybe nobody clicks on the button for 6 months. But I was giving more detailed advice than that. I was sort of like, we were talking about where are you feeling like you're personally at with your trauma right now, and how much can you share about yourself, or how much can you talk about the topic in general while staying within your window of tolerance, which anyone who's done enough therapy is kind of familiar with that phrase, right? Like, do you have a solid baseline for yourself of where you feel like you have a good emotional place that you can rest or return to? And how robust is that? How long can you stay there? How much stress can you tolerate? What kind of stressors can you tolerate? And under what circumstances, while remaining centered or being able to kind of collect yourself and return to center shortly thereafter? And to whatever extent this is a stressor for you, how much would someone have to pay you to tolerate that stress? Right? Or to
My
just
rate was pretty
do the
high.
work? Huh?
Yeah, my rate was pretty high when I was doing
Hmm.
it. I mean, I had a whole page on my website. Like, honestly, each session I approached, I felt grounded, focused on them. I don't feel that I failed in any way, or why I didn't want to do it was because I felt like these people need a therapist. These people need
Yeah.
long-term, continuous, they want to have a one-off consultation. I was not offering coaching like a long-term relationship. I was offering a consultation, like initial, like, here's a dump load of advice, go find these other resources. But what they really wanted and needed was a long-term relationship, and with a professional, ideally a therapist or coach. And I felt like, I can give information in other ways, but how many times, how I just wonder. I mean, everyone who had a consultation with me said it was extremely useful, and I've never heard any complaints about it. But I'm just like, I don't know. It's so emotionally taxing, and I feel like I can just give them the information and they can just hear me speak, or they keep asking me the same questions. Every single person's asking me the same thing. They can just learn about it in other ways, and then I can just link them to the professionals that they can have real long-term, or support groups, or different things. So that's why I stepped out of it, because it's just like, I mean, I would be willing to speak to people like on a one-off, but from for pay, but it's just, I feel I can't really help them, I feel like. And I'm not in a place where I would offer a long-term coaching with my own trauma. I just
Yeah.
can't commit to that. So,
So I do work with parents long term as a therapist, and I also offer consultations. I work with parents in the state of Oregon, where I am licensed to diagnose and treat mental health conditions. And then outside of Oregon, if people want to work with me, this consulting option, I don't diagnose or treat conditions. I'm just speaking as someone who has the experience that I do, both understanding therapy and the world of mental health and family systems, and also understanding where things are at right now with the mental health system, understanding where things are at with the gender crisis. And so when someone consults with me, I just speak frankly based on what I know of both worlds. And I stay grounded in that process. And I charge for my time as well. In fact, I mean, you talk about getting flooded with emails. Tell me what you think about this, because I do not get paid to check my email. In fact, I have paid other people to try to help me with things like that. And I get so much email and so many DMs that I could easily spend all my time working for free. Um, so I set up in my latest auto response, there's a link that you can pay $8 for 8 minutes of my time. It's like book an 8 minute call, pay $8 on PayPal, and we can just talk. We could have a video call to talk about what your question is if it's a quick enough question. Nobody's taken me up on it. I set it up like 2 days ago. Um, but there has to be a way to triage. And I mean, there are professionals, like you mentioned, GenSpect, Gender Exploratory Therapy Association, and then people like myself who are just more kind of rogue free agents, but who walk in both worlds and know the lay of the land. And it is heavy work. And part of why I'm able to work with these parents, it was not just my expertise on the gender issue and understanding where things are at in the world of therapy, it's also years and years of practice sitting with people in great amounts of distress and not trying to jump to superficial solutions, because these parents are really worried, and I do have to set realistic expectations for them. And they turn to me, it sounds like in similar ways that people turn to you sometimes, like this desperation for some kind of savior or some kind of
mhm.
solution. And And even when people ask me for advice on podcasts and things like that, can you give any advice to parents? And it's like, well, it really depends. It's like I customize, I don't think solutions is the word. I customize interventions and approaches and feedback based on so many nuances of the family situation. And that takes time to understand. And it takes a lot of just sitting with their pain and their anxiety and saying, like, there's so much that we can't control here. And I will do my best to help you, but you might lose your kid in so many ways. You might lose the relationship, you might lose them ideologically, you might see your kid go through loss of their physicality. Um, Worst case scenario, every parent's worst nightmare, your kid will die, right? Like, I can't take away the pain and fear of living with those possibilities, but I can try to understand your situation. And yeah, it's just crazy to me because working with these parents is certainly no less challenging. Arguably, it's more challenging at times than working with other clinical populations. And I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist with 10 years of experience. So, like, yeah, turning to like a young, traumatized person who's just trying to get their shit together and saying, like, tell me how to fix my problems is it's too much to ask. And so, but I do want detransitioners to get paid for their time. And so my thought is like, part of the value of people doing the type of work that I'm doing is that we listen to what detransitioners have to say, we integrate it with our own understanding, and then we can speak from that place of integrated experience and wisdom, right? And like you're right, detransitioners have said a lot. Like there's no need for anyone to be contacting you for a specific question when there are thousands of hours on YouTube of conversations that you can watch with people who've been through this. You can watch our documentary, Affirmation Generation. You can read these testimonials. Um, and make sense of it in your own way. But I mean, I don't mean to put parents down. My heart goes out to them. I work with them a lot. Um, and I'm very sympathetic to the needs of parents, but I am glad that today we had a chance to talk about this because it's not something I've talked about on my podcast before. And I think it's important to address. I think like detransitioners are really at the center of this crisis. They are the ones who have directly physically and emotionally suffered the worst. And so we need to be sort of triaging care and putting our arms around you guys as a community. And we're so far from that. Um, I know we're almost out of time, but the one thing that I know we talked about before the interview that we haven't talked about yet is like where do we go from here? I have some thoughts on creating infrastructure for the types of support that this rapidly growing population is going to need. And I welcome you to comment on that if there's any other thoughts you have, Laura, on where do we go from here? What kind of support systems do we put in place? But also just personally, like, where are you going from here too? Because we started with your personal story and we kind of got away from that. But one reason I want to talk to you is because you are such a creative individual. You are distinctively yourself. You are Laura the Funk God, and there's no one quite like you. And it's just really good to see you at this point in your journey. Like, I've known you for a while now in various ways, and I feel like I can sense a change in you. I can feel that you are stronger now than you were like a year ago. And so did you want to talk about kind of your own sort of journey or this place of hope that you're at? Sorry,
Hmm.
that was like three questions in one.
Yeah, I could talk a lot about all of those. Um, well, just to address the first question, I mean, in terms of going forward, what I have always said is the most important thing for detransitioners is affordable mental health treatment. And that's why I'm such a fan. I'm so happy that the Gender Exploratory Therapy Association has been established. I have received therapy. I've had two different therapists now from within that organization. Um, Extremely, competent individuals. And so that's the number one thing. More therapy for detransitioners. And as well as coaching. It doesn't have to be clinical therapy, but coaching, mentorship, and community for detransitioners, building relationships that will inspire that person to be able to heal and to find power within themselves and to be mirrored in their experiences. So support groups and just really focusing on the um, psychosocial aspects of it, because it is such an isolating experience, because it's basically like being isolated from yourself and splitting your psyche in different ways. And so to connect with other people is where I'd like to see it go. Personally, now I have therapy, which I'm that extremely grateful for. I do have those things. What I would personally like is just more opportunities to share my gifts and integrate that with meaningful work within this movement. And I'm extremely grateful that so much is happening right now. There's so many synchronicities. It's very serendipitous right now in my life. I have, graphic design. I have my Etsy store. I've was requested to release a bunch of different products, shirts, hats, stickers, flags, buttons, pins, all these things for detrans awareness specifically. And I've gotten a very positive reception. You were one of my first customers who bought the shirt. So, I have been able to integrate, again, this sort of trauma and then survivor Laura and then the funk god Laura. And it's been really a more integration, because even funk god is sort of my idealized version of my higher self that I often feel ashamed that I'm not being funk god. I'm just like, oh, I'm not living up to my own potential. But it's like, no, I am starting to integrate that more now, which is like Laura, the traumatized person. Um, and so more opportunities in ways that detransitioners can, find resources and connections and opportunities to share their story in ways that aren't, we didn't really get into the journalist population, like the parents, the journalists and the media are a whole other thing of how they interact with detransitioners. But in other ways to get paid to doing podcasts, more like this, which is obviously we're more like friends. We know each other, but podcasts that are like, but what Benjamin Boyce does, he does it really well. He really does take a genuine interest in the person and holistically, and isn't just asking the same journalistic sort of questions. So opportunities like that where people can really shine in their holistic selves, any opportunities for a person to express their unique gifts and interests related to advocacy, if they have that energy to do so, which so many have that anger and energy to motivate them to do something and give advice and get involved. And I think doing that in a way that's less like, being overwhelmed with, requests for advice on how to solve other people's life problems, and or being asked to be a martyr in some kind of political way, and more just like, you have a really valuable writing skill. Would you like to write an essay for this blog? That sort of thing where they have more autonomy over it, over their own story. Um, so that's what I'd like to see personally. I think more opportunities. And like I said, in terms of my sort of hope related to that, I am going to LA in a couple of days as of filming this for Detrans Awareness Day. And I'm speaking on a panel, a Q&A discussion panel on Affirmation Generation. And then I'm organizing a sort of other events with detransitioners. And there's going to be a lot of community healing, just real interpersonal experiences. Um as well as, I have my designs and various opportunities for graphic design work, and all these sort of ways that I can express my gifts um and in a way that makes me feel empowered, versus just rehashing my victim narrative over and over and over again as trauma porn for voyeurs.
Wow, sharp words, and great
Yeah.
points. Thank you so much, Laura. It's been great to have you here. So I will make sure that I include your Etsy link in the show notes, but tell people all the places that they can find you.
So the main place that I get into trouble is on Twitter, Funk God Artist. You can also check out my whole portfolio and all my philosophies on my website, funkgod.com. My Etsy shop is Funk God. And you can also find me on Substack at Funky Psyche and on YouTube as Laura Funk God. So
Great,
wherever
Laura.
funk gods are sold.
Well, you're easily found. All right.
Yes.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist podcast with Stephanie Wynn, LMFT. This podcast is produced by Eric and Amber Beals at Different Mix. Special thanks to the talented musician Joey Pecoraro for our theme song, Half Awake. At sometherapist.com, you can find more information on any topic, guest, resource, product, or service you've heard of here today. You can also follow me on Twitter or Instagram at sometherapist. If you would like to ask a question, suggest a topic, be a guest, or invite me to speak, you can email us at hello@sometherapist.com. You can also send us a voice memo with your question, and we just might play it. Of course, just because I'm some therapist doesn't mean I'm your therapist. This podcast is not a substitute for medical advice. If you need help, ask your doctor or browse your local therapists online. And whatever you do next, please take care of yourself. Eat well, sleep well, move your body, get outside, and tell someone you love them. You're worth it.